Okay, Tzaddik Talmud Aleph 94a. The very last line. The Gemara is discussing the downfall of Sanhedrin in the context. This all came about because we're talking about the context of Mashiach, and we discussed how Chizkiah was capable of being Mashiach, almost going to be Mashiach, and then that brought up the issue of Sanhedrin. We talked about Chizkiah as the counterforce to Sanhedrin. We talked a little bit about Sanhedrin's personality himself, wise king, foolish king, both. Now we get a little bit to his relationship with Hashem. So Tanamish made Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, the very last line, second word. It's been taught in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. Paroi, Pharaoh of Egypt, the Pharaoh of the Exodus, or of the subjugation, Shechiriv Ba'atzmai, who himself cursed, spoke disparagingly towards Hashem. Nifra Kadosh Baruch Hu, God paid him back retribution, Mimenu, from him, Ba'atzmai, alone, on himself. Equal footing. He spoke negatively of Hashem. Hashem directly punishes him. Sanhedrin, however, Shechiriv Aydei Shliach, Sanhedrin, which curses, speaks disparagingly through an agent, Nifra Kadosh Baruch Hu Mimenu Aydei Shliach, so Hashem exact retribution through an agent, through a shliach. So as Rashi explains, you have a principle in halacha actually, that one of the right there, I should make sight of that principle in halacha. Kolafim is bayish. Right? There's a principle in halacha that when a person pays for damaging, like someone hurts somebody else physically, so there are 5 different things one has to pay for. And one of the 5 things is, loss of work, pain, doctor bills, that kind of stuff. And one of the things you need to pay for is busha, the embarrassment of getting hit, getting hurt. And halach is you determine based on the greatness of the one who did the embarrassing and the one who's received the embarrassment. It's worse to get embarrassed by a lowly person than be embarrassed by someone of great stature. It's the halacha. It's worse when someone of low nature, if you're highborn, if you're a nobility, and a commoner embarrasses you, it's worse than if another highborn nobleman embarrasses you. It's the halacha. So here likewise, Paroi, who himself curses Hashem, so to speak, so Hashem himself exacts retribution, because he at least did the honor of Hashem of cursing God himself. Whereas Sanhedrin curses through an agent. It's even more demeaning, so to speak. Right? Sorry? Yeah, it's like, it's so beneath me to curse Hashem, I'm sending somebody else, an agent, to curse Hashem. So Hashem also punishes him through an agent, which is more demeaning, as opposed to Hashem himself engaging in punishing him.
That's what Bilam did to Balak.
What do you mean?
He sent him to curse the Jews.
Yeah, because he wasn't capable of doing it. He's hiring someone who was more capable. We're just talking about the level of embarrassment. It's more demeaning when as a king, it's beneath me to go curse that God there. I'm going to send somebody else to do it. So Hashem punishes him through an agent as well. So the Gemara now cites the verses which back this idea up. Paroi, where do we know about Paroi himself cursing Hashem, than himself being punished by Hashem, being punished by Hashem himself as opposed to through an agent? Tiksib Bey, the second to top line in Tzaddik Talmud Beis 94b. Tiksib, for of him it is stated, the verse says, Paroi is speaking, Mi Hashem, who is God? Asher Eshba B'Kei, that I should listen to him. So he himself curses God. So Nifra Kadosh Baruch Hu Mimenu Ba'atzmai, Hashem himself exacts retribution upon him. Tiksib, as the verse reads, Vayinar Hashem es Mitzrayim b'Sei Chayom. God himself shook the Egyptians, or made the Egyptians be swallowed in the ocean. Tiksib Darachta B'Yam Sisecha, and the verse elsewhere in Chavakuk describes the splitting of the sea and the Egyptians' horses falling in there as God himself doing it. Darachta, you, God, did it. The Maharsha has a whole discussion on this, why these verses, other verses where it seems to imply that God himself did things, but we'll leave that. So, Sanhedrin, where do we see that Sanhedrin cursed Hashem through an agent, and then himself got retribution from Hashem through an agent? Ksiv, as it reads, B'yad malachecha, this is a book in, the verse in Kings. B'yad malachecha charaft Hashem, you, Sanhedrin, cursed God through your agent. B'yad malachecha, on the hands of your agent, charaft Hashem, you cursed Hashem. So, Nifra, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Menu Adei Shliach, so God is, end quote from the verse, so God as well, exact retribution through an agent, through an agent, Ksiv, as the verse reads, Vayetze Malach Hashem, Vayach Machna Ashnar, Mea Ushmonim V'chamesha Elef Gomer. The night of Pesach, the night before Sanhedrin is destined or planned to attack Jerusalem, an angel arrives and hits them all, as we described before, described in the previous Gemara, how their bodies are consumed, or their souls left their bodies, or their bodies left their clothing. Either way, it was done through an agent, because he only cursed Hashem through an agent. Okay, so this is the Gemara. To try to explain this a little bit deeper, and with a simple question that could be asked here. Is Hashem on an equal footing to any of these? What does this mean? PHAROH curses Hashem himself. That's, at least he's giving God the honor, so to speak, of cursing Hashem himself. So Hashem goes back and punishes him himself. Whereas Sanhedrin is more demeaning of God in that he curses God through an agent, so God sends an agent. It makes it sound as if PHAROH, Sanhedrin, and God are on the same level. So if PHAROH curses God on this level, Hashem is going to respond back on the same level. But God and PHAROH the same level. Meaning, like, presumably God's so beyond any of this stuff. But like, what does this mean? Yeah, like Rashi says that it's more demeaning for Hashem to get cursed by an agent than by the king himself. Really? Like, it makes a difference if Sanhedrin curses Hashem or an agent curses Hashem. Like, what's going on here? So perhaps it goes something like this.
Like Hashem has feelings and hurting his feelings.
Yeah, something like that. Even that itself is what this means. So obviously talking about a level of Hashem which allows himself to be that way, which itself requires explanation. So perhaps, it's a suggestion, of course, I'm sure there are many other explanations, and you're welcome. We've talked about here in the past, based on the 6th chapter of Yigeret Tshuva in Alter Rebbe's Tanya, of part 3 of Tanya, chapter 6. Where let's back up a second before. We used that chapter to explain another thing. Why is it that during the time of the temple, when you had obvious divine revelation, was there such a strong pull for idol worship? The Gemara describes in there's 2 indications. There's more than 2, but there's 2 at least, where one it compares idol worship to the desire of intimacy. That's how base and how intrinsic and instinctual the urge is. And elsewhere the Gemara says that there's a sage of the Gemara who met someone from earlier time and asked him, what were you thinking, like running to idol worship? He said, if you were there, you would have held up your tunics so you can run faster to get to idol worship. That's how great the draw was. So at the same time, there's this great revelation at the temple. You have prophets speaking in the name of God. You have open miracles every day. And yet you have this great pull for idol worship. So this is explained in the context of a similar thing that Talmud talks about in chapter 6 of Yigeret Tshuva, which is, why is it that people used to die from Kaddis? Kaddis is certain sins which the Torah prescribes death by the hands of heaven. Excision. I was going to say exegesis. No, excision. So why is it that people don't die of excision anymore? If it's in the hands of the court, okay, we don't have a capital punishment in a court, fine, but God can do whatever he wants. So if there's someone who violates a commandment for which he's liable for capital punishment by the hands of heaven, he should die by the hands of heaven. Right? So the halacha is officially supposed to live between 50 and 60 years, and yet, as the Alter says it, people live way past 60 years old and live a happy life. So it's not as if like they live in poverty, which is somewhat compared to death. They're living a good and happy life. So explains the Alter Rebbe that a person died of Kaddis when their entire life was, their physical life was a direct extension of their spiritual life. We have a godly soul, we have an animal soul. Animal soul is the human part of us, what makes us human, and the godly soul is what connects us to that which transcends, to a direct line to the divine. So when you're living on a direct line to the divine, so if you mess with that line, there's natural results. Person dies. if you mess with that line of life source. But because nowadays our life source, even though it's true we still have a connection to our godly soul, because our life source today is convoluted and embedded within the natural world, we live off of our nefesh Bahamas now, not directly off our nefesh Lakis. We don't live physically, our physical bodies do not live off our godly souls. Our godly souls are somewhere bedded deep down in our natural souls. So, natural soul lives a natural life. And the fact that you've messed with the connection that your godly soul has to Hashem doesn't have bearing on your natural life, because your natural life comes from your natural soul, from your natural state of being. In other words, the fact that we don't get excision for violating these commandments is because we aren't in tune enough to spirituality to have the adverse effects of being disconnected from spirituality. If our lives were in direct concert with spirituality, we live directly off spiritual life, then any mess with any mess up with our spiritual connection to Hashem would have a physical manifestation. All to say that when the physical world is in direct sync with the spiritual world, so the world in and of itself is much more sensitive to spirituality, and therefore, when the world is in direct touch with spirituality, there's more obvious divine revelation, but there's an equal measure of pull of not good spiritual pull. It's an equal measure, right? So if there's a divine revelation of such a high standing in the spirit, because that's our relationship to the spiritual world, then our relationship to negative spirituality is just as equal. They're equal in our world today, like the Mittler Rebbe says it, that today we don't have such great tzaddikim, we don't have great Rishayim. Tzaddikim aren't that great, and the Rishayim aren't that, the righteous aren't that great, and the wicked aren't that bad. Meaning to say, we're not so in tune with a spiritual life to begin with. So our extremes aren't as high. Everything's embedded in the world of nature, so everything's become kind of gray. In which the lines between good and spiritual, good and evil are very close. They're not so extreme and polarized. If we were in touch with spirituality, we'd be able to see this is good, this is evil, but each of them would be equally as enticing. Because they're both true and real in a sense. Today they're both in the abstract, both spiritual negativities in the abstract and spiritual goodness in the abstract. So they both have equally no pull or yes pull. But when you have them both in their strength, you have a divine temple and you have a Baal temple, you're pulled in both directions. Just like today you're pulled in both directions for closer stuff between kosher food and non-kosher food, so to speak. Clear on this somewhat?
This is sort of similar to what we learned in Tanya recently, but the more a person goes up the spiritual ladder, the more the pull of the opposite to that becomes.
Yes. A person's davening greater, so his Yetzer Hara wants to get in greater.
Yeah.
It's a very similar idea, but take that into the macro on a massive scale. In other words, the entire world is not living in a materialistic life, it's living a completely spiritual life. Then all spiritual forces become real and palpable, both the positive and the negative. See?
But in the time of Beit Rishon, there was a Avodah Zarah. I'm not sure if people died PHAROH.
By Rishon? Why wouldn't they?
No, but it's not clear that people live long and that not everyone died.
Unless it's tshuva, maybe. But why wouldn't it die from Kodesh?
No, but that's what I'm saying about how it challenges theory. Maybe Hashem has other cheshbonis that people...
That's for sure. Hashem has his own cheshbonis.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
at one point in life, Kodesh had to exist, right? The Torah says about Kodesh. So when did it exist?
It could very well be when you can say there's one view as Nichrad Mi'amav, when the whole majority of people are not observing and the whole situation is different. That's the way of looking at it.
It's not a contradiction, it's the same thing.
So
it's the same exact thing.
Even at Beit Rishon, I'm saying, since like the 10 tribes, for example, they didn't... They drifted to idolatry. Hashem didn't destroy them right away. Of course, eventually they lived in a different spiritual state. I don't think these are a contradiction. The Rebbe actually uses I don't remember exactly, so I'm going to leave it alone. But anyway, so all to get to this Gemara here. So when it says that Hashem Himself is punishing because Pareh himself is cursed. So maybe what it means is that when the forces of negativity, represented by Pareh and Sanhedrin, themselves are exposed, so the divine revelation is itself also exposed in equal measure. So Pareh, it's not as if like Hashem is offended and therefore He's going to make a more offensive punishment because He's more offended because Sanhedrin sent a messenger, so God's also going to send a messenger.
it's describing a state of spiritual being in this world. And when the Jewish people come out of Egypt, the world is in a state of extreme in touchness with divine truth, to the point that they actually receive the Torah at Sinai in the most obvious and blatant form of divine revelation that could ever have been. So when that exists, which explains, by the way, why right afterwards, and tons of times throughout the desert, they keep on saying, let's go back to Egypt. Didn't you just see divine revelation? What do you want to go back to Egypt for? So, to some degree, it seems like, in the same way there's a divine revelation, there's also the exposing to the glory of spiritual negativity, embodied by PHAROH. So when PHAROH himself curses, as in to say, when negative spiritual forces are fully open and exposed, so is open divine truth. Hashem himself does the exacting the punishment. And when Sennacherib, where the negative forces are somewhat convoluted in that they come through an agent, so divine revelation is also somewhat convoluted, it comes through an agent. Following?
I still fail to see how Hashem did so many miraculous things for them.
And they still didn't do it.
And it's like the smallest little obstacle that comes across. Oh, we want to go back to Egypt.
Yeah. So there's two things to be said about this, and they're both related. And it's related to this as well. The first thing is, we refer to the manna as the bread of shame. Why? Why is the manna bread of shame? Because you didn't work for it. So it's like a child. The more you give a child free stuff, the more he expects free stuff, and the more angry he gets by the slightest thing that didn't give him exactly what you wanted. Right? So it connects back to what we're saying here. The greater the divine revelation, the less you've earned your connection to God, the more enticing that which is not godly is there. Today, and this is part we're talking about this in the past, how the process of Mashiach coming comes through, like we mentioned before, the treacherous of the treachery, layers and layers of treachery, layers of concealment. The process of Mashiach coming is where there is no great divine revelation, nor is there a great evil impulse, and you have to figure out your way in the world yourself. That's really what Mashiach's revelation is. Right? So back in the times of when the Jews came out of Egypt, when they had obvious exposed divine revelation, they didn't earn any of that. They didn't earn any of the divine revelation. It was completely foreign to them. So the slightest thing, and they're like, oh, look, there's better spirituality there, I'm running right back. Right? Whereas today, we earn our spirituality.
But still, if I was
different.
put into their position,
sorry?
Still, if I was put into their position, and God came down on the top of a mountain.
Yeah, it's easy to say that from this point perspective.
And raised the mountain and said, I'm going to drop it over your heads if you don't take it. I mean, what more? I mean, I would be so hooked on him.
Yeah.
I would never go to anything else.
So that's the expression, easy come, easy go. As easily as you got hooked because God imposed it upon you, as easily you could say, oh, there's a better one there. Whereas today, it's a different story because every ounce of spirituality has to be squeezed and wringed out like a press at you like an olive till you finally get a little drop of spirituality from somewhere. It's not like you just run around, run to it. Are you feeling down? Run to the temple and get a high. It doesn't exist anymore. You got to work and work and work to finally earn your tiny drop of spirituality, and that's really what Mashiach's coming is. So, and I'm suggesting that the Gemara is describing a similar thing, where in time of Egypt, the divine revelation was open and exposed. So PHAROH is open and exposed. The opposite force is equally as enticing. When it comes to Sanhedrin time, where his cursing of God is embedded through an agent, so divine revelation comes through an agent, and like this, we've slowly been descending and less in tune to spirituality. But at the same time, our earning that level of spirituality has grown in equal measure, which is...
We're trying. We're all trying very hard.
We're trying and we're succeeding.
They didn't try because it was all...
That's the point.
That's the point.
Exactly.
They weren't trying.
They weren't trying.
It was gift wrapped.
Yeah.
It was a gift.
Yeah.
It's like anything you invest a lot in, whether it's your work, your marriage, or anything, the more you invest in it, the more you're attached to it, the more deeper is the attachment. My marriage is breaking up like crazy because people aren't working at them.
Mm.
So, you know what? If she doesn't satisfy this or that of my, if she's not as pretty as it was,
yeah.
But if the person had worked at the marriage really sincerely, like your father describes all the time what marriage really is, if they really were, they wouldn't just discard.
Yeah.
It's just
inconvenient now. Move on.
There's no work. There's no avoiding it.
Yeah. Yes, indeed.
It still blows my mind.
Yeah.
Well,
you saw God, my God.
yeah.
What greater revelation can you see? I saw God.
Yep.
You weren't enslaved for a long period of time. You
there's
kept
Yeah.
slavery
yourself
in their
possession.
factory, yeah.
You didn't have Egypt in you. Maybe
500 years later, in the times of the temple, when they had 10 miracles, they didn't have slavery, and they still ran on running off to the Baal Peor. You're watching 10 miracles. Imagine there's a place down the block. You walk into the place, and you see a miracle every day. And that's the point. You see it every day. It becomes like, okay, fine, so it's a miracle, but there's still fun there. It becomes
Habitual.
it becomes nothing because you didn't earn it. Okay, so you walk down the block and you see a miracle. You go down the other block and there's a fun party called Baal Peor. So I'll go to the Baal Peor. It's just as fun. I'm saying the forces are of equal measure.
I can understand Abraham. I mean, they put him into a furnace and he came out he was fine. That's a revelation from God.
Which is what, so that's a good example. So Nimrod, the Medrash describes Nimrod, the king then who watched this happen, watched Avram come out of the furnace, pledged allegiance to God on the spot.
Yeah.
How long later do you think it took him to abandon it? Not
3
much
days.
longer, because as easy as it came, as easy as it went.
Also, Avram's brother went and he got burned.
Avram brother decided he wanted to do it.
You see there's some doubt exactly.
He was
That's
trying
why.
to-
Even though Rambam said that's a marshal, but it doesn't matter. The Medrash says that
He
it's,
wanted the best of the best.
Yeah, because Avram went to the same Shemayim, not with intention of being saved.
but the point of this conversation is similar. It's the same point. You're making this. It's the same point. Like when you work for all these things, and you appreciate it. Someone who works, it happens all the time with first generation wealth versus second generation wealth. The first generation wealth that works very hard for every dollar they have. Sometimes there's I don't want to say they get a note at their children, but they have they bemoan their children's state that they don't appreciate the money, even though they earned it and they wanted to spoil their kids because they didn't want their kids to live the life that they did. But then when they get older and they realize that the value they have in money is because they worked for it, and they didn't let their children do that because they just gave them everything, and their kids don't value the money.
No.
It's a similar kind of thing. So it's been 2,500 years. I think we all agree we've earned our place. We've earned the revelation. Maybe now.
Then we have the symbol of this wonderful symbol of Yehoshua ben Nun, who was by the side of Moses or Moshe Rabbeinu always, and did have
Layomash B'Piyah oil.
exactly. So maybe you're a Gilgul of Yehoshua ben Nun.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's right. There were people then who said, "There's a revelation here. I'm not going anywhere else. I'm staying right here."
Maybe a reincarnation of
Yeah, halavai.
But you're a coin, though.
No.
You're only through the mother's side because Yeshua was the
That's right.
Gilgulim and how Gilgulim work exactly. If you go through Karim Lakakan. Anyway, have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you very much.